A black boy was sacked from school for being poor. He walked through a crowd of students who judged his torn shoes and faded shirt. But what happened next proved that faith can turn pain into a miracle. The morning sun poured gently over Lincoln Elementary, where laughter and chatter filled the schoolyard. Children ran in bright clothes, backpacks bouncing, faces glowing with innocence. But as the gate creaked open, the noise quieted for a moment. Foster walked in. His shirt, once white, had faded to a pale gray. His shoes, torn at the sides, flapped with each step. He carried an old plastic bag instead of a backpack, holding his few notebooks tightly as if they were treasure. Heads turned. Whispers began. "Why does he always wear the same thing?" one boy muttered. "He smells funny," another girl whispered, wrinkling her nose. Foster heard them all. He always did, but he kept walking, his eyes fixed on the classroom door. Inside, students slid their chairs away from his desk. One boy coughed loudly and said, "Don't sit near me." Foster quietly took a corner seat by the window, his usual spot, the only place no one claimed. Outside, laughter returned. Inside, silence surrounded him. As the teacher called names, Foster answered softly, "Present." His voice trembled like it might break. The teacher nodded, her expression unreadable. No one wanted to talk to him. No one ever did. During lunch, Foster sat alone under a tree, eating a small piece of bread he had saved from breakfast. Other kids exchanged snacks, chips, cookies, sandwiches, and laughed. When one apple rolled near his feet, the owner snatched it back before he could even look up. For them, Foster wasn't just poor, he was invisible. Yet behind his tired eyes lived something unbreakable. Every afternoon when school ended, he'd walk miles back home, holding hope tighter than the notebooks in his plastic bag. He'd whisper softly to himself, "Maybe one day, things will change." That evening, while others watched cartoons and did homework, Foster washed his one shirt in a bucket and hung it near the window to dry. He looked out at the stars and smiled faintly. "Tomorrow," he said to the night, "I'll still go, even if no one wants me there." He didn't know that tomorrow would bring something far worse than loneliness, and it would change his life forever. The next morning, the hallway buzzed with chatter long before the first bell. Foster walked in quietly, clutching his plastic bag to his chest. His shirt was clean but still faded. His shoes still spoke of struggle, yet he carried himself with quiet dignity, unaware that the whispers had already begun. "Did you hear?" a boy murmured near the lockers. "My mom said that boy has no parents." "You, really? That's why he looks like that," another replied, pretending to gag. When Foster passed by, they went silent, pretending to tie their shoes. But as soon as he entered his classroom, the noise started again, this time from the parents waiting outside for morning drop-off. "He smells," one mother said under her breath, her perfume thick in the air. "I told my son not to sit near him." "Who knows what kind of diseases poor people bring," another added. A third nodded, eyes sharp with disgust. "Honestly, if the school can't maintain standards, what are we paying for?" Foster could hear their muffled voices through the open door. He didn't cry. He never did. But his hands trembled slightly as he opened his notebook. Inside were careful drawings of stars, trees, and a small house. On one page, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "I will build a better life for me and Amara." During class, a girl raised her hand. "Mrs. Clark, can I move my seat? Foster's smell is making me sick." The teacher froze, embarrassment rushing through her face. "That's not a kind thing to say, Melissa." "But it's true," the girl snapped. The class laughed. Foster stared at his desk, wishing it would swallow him whole. At recess, no one invited him to play. He sat by the fence, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. He looked through the wire mesh at other kids tossing a ball, their laughter echoing like a world he could never touch. That evening, parents gathered near the gate again. One mother waved a paper, a letter she was drafting to the school board. "If the school wants to keep its reputation," she said loudly, "that boy must go." Foster didn't see them. He was too busy walking home, counting every coin he'd saved that day, hoping it would be enough to buy his little sister bread. But the walls were already closing in, and the cruelty was just beginning. The morning felt heavier than usual. The sky was gray, and the air carried the faint scent of rain. Foster walked through the school gates with quiet steps, his stomach empty but his heart steady. He had no idea that behind the office door a meeting about him was already underway. Principal Grant sat behind his large wooden desk, rubbing his temples as two mothers stood before him. "This can't go on," one of them snapped. "That boy is an embarrassment. He's dirty, smells bad, and my son says he can barely concentrate sitting near him." "Mrs. Turner," the principal began carefully, "Foster is a good student. He's polite, quiet, and never causes trouble." "That's not the point," she interrupted sharply. "Good behavior doesn't change the fact that he doesn't belong here. Maybe he's better off in some special school for the poor." Principal Grant sighed deeply. His conscience battled with the pressure from the school board and the parents' complaints. He looked out the window and saw Foster walking toward the classroom, his little frame swallowed by a faded shirt 2 sizes too big. "Send him to my office," he said quietly. Minutes later, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Grant said softly. Foster stepped inside, holding his bag close. His eyes darted nervously from the floor to the principal's face. "Foster," Mr. Grant began, trying to sound kind, "how are you today?" "I'm fine, sir," Foster answered, though his voice was small. The principal hesitated. "Do you live with your parents?" Foster lowered his head. "No, sir. My parents, they're gone." Mr. Grant leaned forward. "Who do you live with, then?" "With my little sister, Amara. She's 5. My aunt said she can't take care of us anymore because she has too many kids." The principal swallowed hard. "And how do you survive?" Foster looked up, eyes glistening. "I collect bottles and sell them. It's enough to buy bread sometimes. I don't mind being hungry. But I pray every day that Amara won't have to live the way I do." The room fell silent. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Before the principal could respond, a loud voice echoed from the hall. The same angry mother who had been complaining earlier. "I told you, he's making up stories. Poor people always do this for pity." Foster stood frozen, his cheeks burning. He wanted to disappear. Mr. Grant looked at him, torn between duty and compassion. "You can go now, Foster," he said quietly. Foster nodded and left, his shoulders hunched under a weight no child should carry. That night, Mr. Grant couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the boy's voice. "I pray that she won't have to live the way I did." But outside, the town was already whispering, louder, colder, and crueler than ever. The following day, dark clouds gathered over Lincoln Elementary, as if the sky itself was tired of watching the cruelty below. Principal Grant sat in his office again, nervously tapping his pen against a stack of letters. The complaints had tripled overnight. The pressure was building, and it was about to explode. The door swung open with a sharp creak. Mrs. Turner, the same furious mother from before, marched in holding an envelope. Her heels clicked like gunshots against the tiled floor. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice cold and full of control, "this is the final straw." She slammed the envelope down on his desk. "What's this?" the principal asked quietly. "A letter signed by 12 parents," she said. "We all agree that poor boy has to go. If he can't live decently, he shouldn't be here, studying beside our children." Her words cut like a knife. The principal opened the letter, scanning the lines filled with anger and prejudice. Words like unhygienic, disruptive, and bad influence leapt from the page. It wasn't just cruel, it was inhuman. "Mrs. Turner," Mr. Grant said, struggling to keep his composure, "this boy has done nothing wrong." "He's done enough just by being here," she snapped. "My son came home in tears because everyone keeps teasing him for sitting near that boy. Do you understand how this looks for the school's image?" For a long moment, Grant didn't reply. He knew the school board was already whispering. He knew that funding, donations, and the reputation of Lincoln Elementary were on the line. He also knew what was right, but right didn't always win. Mrs. Turner crossed her arms. "If you don't act, I'll take this to the district office. Believe me, they'll listen." When she stormed out, the principal sat in silence, staring at the letter. He looked up at the framed photo of his graduating class from years ago, smiling children of every background. and wondered when compassion had become a liability. That afternoon, as Foster quietly read in the corner of the classroom, the teacher received a call. "Please send Foster to the office," the voice said over the intercom. Whispers filled the room. "He's in trouble again," a boy said with a smirk. Foster stood slowly, his heart pounding. As he walked down the hallway, the teachers glanced at him, some with pity, some with avoidance. In the office, the principal didn't look him in the eye. "You can go home early today," he said softly. "We'll talk tomorrow," Foster nodded. He didn't understand, but deep down he felt it. Something terrible was coming. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, soaking the letter of shame still lying on the principal's desk. That night, the rain came hard, pounding the rooftops, flooding the gutters, and turning the streets into rivers of mud. Thunder rolled across the dark sky, echoing through the small town like a warning from heaven. In a narrow alley behind an old store, a faint light flickered under a torn blue tarp. Beneath it sat Foster, his knees pulled to his chest, holding his little sister, Amara, close. She was shivering in his arms, wrapped in a thin towel that was already soaked through. "Are you cold, Amara?" he whispered softly. She nodded, her voice trembling. "A little." Foster pulled her closer, shielding her tiny body from the rain. "It's okay. We'll be fine. I promise." His words were brave, but his heart was breaking. The truth was, he had no idea where they'd sleep tomorrow or what they'd eat in the morning. Their old aunt had locked the door on them weeks ago, muttering, "I've got mouths of my own to feed." Since then, every night had been a battle between hunger and hope. Lightning flashed across the alley, revealing two small figures huddled together, alone but not defeated. Foster's hands trembled not from fear but from exhaustion. Still, he lifted his head toward the sky and whispered, "God, I know you can see us. I know you can hear me. I'm not asking for much. If you can't give me food or clothes, please, just don't let me lose my faith." The rain kept falling, soaking through the tarp, but Foster didn't move. He kept whispering his prayer, over and over, until the sound of footsteps approached. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Foster?" a voice called. "Foster, is that you?" He turned and saw Miss Evelyn, his teacher, standing under an umbrella. Her face was filled with shock and sorrow. She stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "Oh, sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Talking to God," he said simply. "I told him not to let me lose faith." Tears filled her eyes. She looked at his soaked clothes, at Amara's shaking little body, and felt her heart twist with guilt. "Come on," she whispered. "You can't stay here." "Let me take you somewhere warm." But Foster shook his head. "No, ma'am. If I leave, no one will be here to watch our things." He smiled faintly. "Besides, I think God is listening." Miss Evelyn covered her mouth to stop herself from crying. In that moment, she realized this boy, with nothing but a plastic tarp and faith, had more strength than anyone she'd ever met. When she left that night, she didn't just carry an umbrella. She carried a burden on her heart. And by morning, the world would finally learn his name. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the world still looked heavy, as if it carried the memory of last night's tears. The streets shimmered with puddles, and Foster's clothes were still damp when he woke. His little sister Amara slept soundly beside him, her head resting on his lap. He brushed her wet curls gently from her face and whispered, "Stay here, okay? I'll be back soon." He took his plastic bag, carefully wrapped his soggy notebooks inside an old piece of cardboard, and started the long walk to school. Each step squished in his shoes, his socks cold and sticky. But Foster didn't care. He had promised himself he'd never give up on learning, no matter what. When he entered the classroom, all heads turned. His shirt clung to his small frame. His shoes left tiny wet prints on the floor. "Oh, he's dripping." One boy shouted, "Go sit somewhere else!" Another sneered. The teacher hesitated, caught between pity and protocol. "Foster, maybe you should dry off in the hall for a bit." Foster nodded silently. He didn't argue. He just stepped outside, pressing his back against the wall. From there, he could hear the laughter inside, muffled but cruel, like echoes of something he wished he could unhear. During lunch, he sat alone again, watching the rain slide down the windows. His bread was soaked and soft, but he ate quietly, grateful for even that. Then, near the end of the day, the intercom crackled to life. "Foster Daniels, please report to the principal's office." His heart sank. He stood slowly, gripping his bag tighter, and walked down the hall as whispers followed him like shadows. Inside, Principal Grant sat stiffly behind his desk. His eyes looked tired, almost ashamed. Beside him stood the school secretary holding an envelope. "Foster," the principal began, his voice low and uneasy, We've received some complaints. The board decided that—" The secretary stepped forward and handed him the letter. "You're being expelled effective immediately." The words didn't register at first. They floated in the air like smoke, wrapping around Foster's heart. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "God, please don't let me lose my faith." The principal's pen froze midair. His throat tightened, but he said nothing. Policy had already spoken louder than compassion. Foster nodded faintly, tucked the letter into his bag, and turned toward the door. As he walked out, the sound of thunder rumbled again in the distance, as if the heavens themselves were watching. Outside the school gate, he lifted his face to the sky. "I won't stop believing," he murmured. He didn't know that somewhere inside the school, one teacher was already weeping, and soon her tears would change everything. That night, the rain had stopped, but Miss Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat at her small kitchen table, the lamplight casting long shadows across the room. The image of Foster, soaked, trembling, clutching that cardboard-wrapped notebook, haunted her like a wound that wouldn't close. She'd tried to stay quiet earlier, tried to follow school policy, but now the silence felt like betrayal. The boy's words echoed in her head. "If God can't give me food or clothes, please, don't let me lose my faith." She pressed her hand to her mouth and sobbed. "Dear Lord, what have we done?" The phone on the counter seemed to call out to her. She grabbed it and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Marcus?" she whispered when a groggy voice answered. "Evelyn, it's midnight. What's wrong?" "It's about one of my students," she said, her voice cracking. "A boy named Foster? They expelled him today because he's poor." There was silence on the line. Then Marcus, a journalist for the local paper, said slowly, "They what?" "They expelled him." The parents pressured the board. They said he was dirty, unfit to study with their children. Her tears fell harder now. "Marcus, this boy lives on the street with his 5-year-old sister. He collects bottles just to feed her, and he still shows up every morning to learn. And today they threw him out like trash." Marcus was quiet, then said in a firm voice, "I need every detail." For the next hour, Miss Evelyn told him everything about the cruel letter, the meeting, the rain, and the prayer. When she finished, Marcus said, "This isn't just a story, Evelyn. It's a mirror of what's wrong with all of us. I'll make sure people hear his name." By morning, the story hit the headlines. "Expelled for being poor, the boy who prayed in the rain." The article spread like wildfire. Photos of Foster kneeling under a plastic tarp appeared across social media. People cried reading his words. "God, if you can't give me food or clothes, please don't let me lose my faith." Comments flooded in from around the country. "This boy has more courage than most adults." "Shame on that school. Where can I help?" By afternoon, local news vans lined the street outside Lincoln Elementary. The teachers whispered. The principal avoided reporters, and the town that had once ignored Foster now couldn't stop talking about him. Miss Evelyn watched from her window, tears streaming down her cheeks, not of guilt this time, but of hope. For the first time, the world was listening, and soon someone extraordinary would respond. By sunrise, Foster's story was everywhere. Newspapers carried it. Radios discussed it. Social media exploded with hashtags. Either faith like Foster, either justice for the boy, and either poverty is not Asen. People who had never met him suddenly cared, weeping at the sight of that one haunting photo. Foster kneeling in the rain, his eyes lifted to heaven. In the small town, everything changed overnight. The same parents who once whispered now hid behind silence. Their children, who used to laugh at Foster, stared at their phones in shame. Even the principal's office was flooded with calls, some angry, some offering donations, and some demanding answers. At the corner store, an old man set down his newspaper and said to the cashier, "You see that boy? That's what faith looks like." Across town, Miss Evelyn's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, charities, even church groups wanted to know more. But she told them the same thing. Don't just write about him. Help him. Meanwhile, Foster didn't know about any of it. He and little Amara sat quietly in their alley, sharing a stale piece of bread. "Did you eat?" she asked, breaking her half in two. He smiled gently. "I'm okay, Amara. You eat." Her big eyes blinked. "When will we go back to school?" He looked away. "Soon," he said softly, even though he didn't believe it. That same afternoon, Miss Evelyn found them again. She knelt beside them with a basket of food. "Foster," she said, her eyes red from crying. "Your story. It's everywhere. People are talking about you. The whole town is watching." He blinked in confusion. "Talking about me? Why?" "Because you didn't give up," she said, her voice trembling. "Because even when everyone turned their backs, you still prayed." She gave him a blanket and a fresh shirt, and for a moment, Foster just stared at it, unable to move. "Is this really for us?" "Yes, sweetheart. You and your sister deserve better than this." Across town, Principal Grant sat at his desk, staring at the TV. The headline glared. "School expels poor boy. Compassion in question." His hands shook. "What have I done?" he muttered. That night, news vans parked outside the school. Cameras flashed. Reporters interviewed parents and teachers. Some tried to justify what happened. Others hung their heads in shame. And then, quietly but powerfully, something unexpected began to ripple across the nation. Letters, emails, and donations poured in. People wanted to help. Strangers prayed for Foster. Churches held candlelight vigils. But one woman, watching the story from her mansion miles away, didn't just cry. She stood up, turned off her TV, and whispered, "That boy needs a mother." Her name was Mrs. Harrison, and by the next morning she would walk into that school and change everything. Far across town, in a quiet mansion filled with silence and memories, Mrs. Eleanor Harrison sat in her armchair, staring at the television. The news replayed the same heartbreaking clip again and again. A young black boy, drenched in rain, praying under a torn plastic tarp. His small hands were clasped together, his eyes closed, lips trembling as he whispered, "God, please don't let me lose my faith." Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "Oh, child," she murmured softly. "How can a boy so young carry so much pain?" The next segment showed Miss Evelyn's interview. Her voice shook as she said, "He collects bottles to feed his 5-year-old sister. Yet he still comes to school every day, believing education can save him. They expelled him for being poor." Mrs. Harrison clutched her chest. She could hardly breathe. Memories came rushing back. Her own son, Daniel, who had died in a car accident 10 years ago. He'd been the same age as Foster, kind, hopeful, faithful. She rose slowly from her chair, walking toward a framed photograph on the mantel. Her trembling fingers touched her son's smiling face. "You always said you wanted to help children, didn't you, Danny?" she whispered. "Maybe this is how I can keep your spirit alive." Her butler, an elderly man named Robert, stepped into the room. "Madam, are you all right?" Mrs. Harrison turned to him, eyes glistening with purpose. "No, Robert, but I think I know what I must do." He nodded respectfully. "Is it about the boy from the news?" "Yes," she said, voice firm now. "Find out where that school is. I'm going there tomorrow." Robert hesitated. "And what will you tell them?" Mrs. Harrison looked out the window where raindrops glimmered on the glass. "That I lost a son once. And maybe, just maybe, God has given me another chance to be a mother again." That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Foster's words in her mind over and over. Each one pierced deeper than the last. "If you can't give me food or clothes, please, don't let me lose my faith," she whispered to the quiet room. "Faith that's strong deserves a miracle." By sunrise, her decision was final. She dressed in a neat gray coat, took her late son's favorite silver locket, and placed it gently in her pocket. Then she looked toward the heavens. "Danny," she said softly, "guide me to that boy. The car engine started outside. For the first time in years, Mrs. Harrison felt alive again, driven not by wealth or comfort, but by compassion. She didn't yet know that her arrival would not only rewrite Foster's destiny, but heal her own broken heart, too. The morning sun had barely risen when a sleek black car pulled up in front of Lincoln Elementary School. Teachers, parents, and students turned their heads as the door opened and an elegant elderly woman stepped out. Her silver-gray hair glistened softly in the light, her steps steady but purposeful. It was Mrs. Eleanor Harrison. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is she? Is that the woman from the news? Why is she here?" Mrs. Harrison didn't answer anyone. She clutched her small leather purse and walked straight through the front doors. The receptionist, startled, stood to greet her. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" Mrs. Harrison smiled gently. "No, dear, but I think the principal will want to see me." Moments later, she was ushered into Principal Grant's office. He stood nervously, recognizing her instantly. "Mrs. Harrison? You're the philanthropist who runs the Harrison Foundation. It's an honor to meet you." "Thank you, Mr. Grant," she replied calmly, taking a seat. "I didn't come for pleasantries. I came to talk about a boy named Foster Daniels." The principal's hands trembled slightly. "Yes, that situation has been quite difficult. Mrs. Harrison raised a hand. "Please, don't justify it." "I saw what happened. I read the letters. I watched that video of him praying under the rain. And I wept, Mr. Grant. I wept because that boy reminded me of my late son, humble, hopeful, and kind." Grant's throat tightened. "I tried to fight for him," he said softly. "But the school board—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "And that's why I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to make things right." The door opened suddenly. Miss Evelyn stepped in, her eyes wide with surprise. "Mrs. Harrison?" The older woman smiled. "Ah, you must be Miss Evelyn, the teacher who believed in him when no one else did." "Yes, ma'am," she whispered, tears glistening. Mrs. Harrison placed her purse on the desk and folded her hands. "I want to pay for Foster's education, not just here, but all the way through college if he wishes. And there's more. I want Foster and his little sister to come live with me. They deserve a home, not a tarp." Both adults froze. The room fell silent. "Ma'am," the principal stammered, That's an incredible offer." Mrs. Harrison nodded. "It's not charity. It's love. And love should never need permission." Later that afternoon, as Foster and Amara sat by the alley sharing bread, Miss Evelyn arrived again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Mrs. Harrison, smiling warmly. "Foster," Miss Evelyn said softly, "this lady wants to meet you." He stood shyly, his clothes still damp from yesterday's rain. "Hello, ma'am." Mrs. Harrison knelt, lowering herself to his level. "Hello, Foster. I've been waiting to meet you." He blinked in confusion. You know me?" "I do, sweetheart," she said, tears filling her eyes. "And if it's all right with you, I'd like to take care of you and your sister from now on." For a moment, Foster couldn't speak. His lips trembled. Then he looked up, as if to confirm it wasn't a dream, and whispered, "Thank you, God." Mrs. Harrison gently held his hand. "No, my dear boy, thank you for reminding the world what faith looks like." For the first time in years, Foster and Amara slept in real beds. Soft pillows, warm blankets, the faint scent of lavender drifting through the air. The sound of the rain that once haunted them was now gentle, no longer a warning, but a lullaby. When Foster awoke, sunlight filtered through cream-colored curtains. He blinked several times, unsure if he was dreaming. The sheets were white. The room was neat and cozy. Beside him, Amara was curled up, hugging a small stuffed bear. "Foster," she mumbled sleepily, "is this heaven?" He smiled weakly, stroking her hair. "No, Amma. I think this is home." Downstairs, Mrs. Harrison and Miss Evelyn sat at the breakfast table. The smell of pancakes filled the air as Mrs. Harrison smiled warmly. "They're awake," she said, hearing the small footsteps above. Miss Evelyn nodded, her eyes moist. "I still can't believe it. You've given them everything they never had." Mrs. Harrison shook her head softly. "No, dear. They've given me something I lost, a reason to keep living. When the children came down, they froze at the sight of the table. Plates piled with food, glasses of orange juice, syrup glistening under the light. Foster's eyes widened. "Is this for us?" Mrs. Harrison chuckled. "Of course it is, sweetheart. Sit, eat. You don't have to earn kindness. You deserve it." As Amara giggled and stuffed her cheeks with pancakes, Foster hesitated. He looked at the silver fork in his hand as though it were fragile glass. Then quietly he whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Harrison reached over and gently touched his hand. "You can call me Mom if you'd like." Foster froze. For a long second, he didn't breathe. The word Mom had been buried deep in his heart, untouched for years. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and trembling. "Thank you, Mom." Later that day, Mrs. Harrison took them to the park, their new neighborhood, clean and quiet, surrounded by blooming trees. She bought them new clothes and shoes, books and toys. Every time she turned, Amara was laughing, running ahead with joy, while Foster walked a few steps behind, still trying to believe it was real. That night, as Mrs. Harrison tucked them in, Foster whispered his nightly prayer, but it was different this time. "Dear God," he said softly, "thank you for hearing me when no one else did. I won't ask for anything tonight. I just want to say thank you." Mrs. Harrison wiped a tear from her cheek and kissed his forehead. "Good night, my brave boy," she said gently. And for the first time, Foster fell asleep without fear, under a roof of love instead of rain. 2 weeks later, the morning sun rose over a brand new chapter of Foster's life. He stood before the mirror in his new bedroom, adjusting the collar of a crisp white shirt. His shoes, clean, black, and shining, reflected the light from the window. For the first time, he saw not just the boy who had been rejected, but the boy who had survived. Downstairs, Mrs. Harrison called, "Breakfast is ready, sweetheart." He smiled. "Coming, Mom." The word still felt new but warm, like it finally belonged to him. At the table, Amara swung her legs excitedly. "Are you going to your new school today?" Foster nodded, eating his eggs slowly. "Yeah, Mom said it's a good one." Mrs. Harrison smiled, pouring juice. "It's more than good, dear. It's a place where kindness still lives." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You just be yourself, the same strong, faithful boy I met that day." A few hours later, they pulled up in front of St. Mark's Academy. It was bigger, brighter, and filled with laughter. But this time, Foster wasn't afraid. He stepped out of the car, holding Amara's hand. Mrs. Harrison leaned out the window. "You've got this, my boy." He nodded and took a deep breath. Inside, the teacher, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Ruiz, greeted him warmly. "You must be Foster." "We've been expecting you. Come on in." The classroom buzzed with curiosity. New kid, new face. But when Foster introduced himself, there was something different in his voice. Calm confidence, not fear. "Hi, my name is Foster," he said. "I'm really happy to be here." Some kids smiled. One boy waved him over. "Hey, want to sit here?" That simple gesture, a seat freely offered, felt like a miracle. Throughout the day, Foster listened, asked questions, and even laughed once or twice. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. At recess, a girl approached him shyly. "You're the boy from the news, right?" Foster froze. Yeah, I guess so," she smiled. "My mom showed me your story. She said you have a really big heart." "I think she's right." He laughed softly, surprised by kindness. "Thank you." When the final bell rang, Mrs. Ruiz called the class to attention. "Before you go, I want to say something," she said. "This is Foster. His journey reminds us that strength doesn't come from wealth. It comes from faith. Let's make sure our classroom is a place of kindness." As students clapped, Foster blinked back tears. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't the boy everyone ignored. That evening, when he got home, he ran to Mrs. Harrison and hugged her tightly. "They smiled at me today, Mom," he whispered. She smiled, brushing his hair back. "Of course they did, my love. The world smiles back when you refuse to give up." But while Foster's life was blossoming with peace, somewhere across town the past was stirring. And justice was about to knock on the school's door. Weeks passed, and Foster's life settled into something he never thought possible: calm. He woke to warm breakfasts, wore clean clothes, and walked to school with Amara skipping beside him. Yet, in another part of town, a quiet storm was brewing behind office doors and sealed envelopes. Inside the district's education department, a woman named Carla, an anonymous school inspector, opened an unmarked envelope. There was no return address, only a short note and several attached documents. The note read, "A child was expelled for being poor. The parents forced it. The board knew. The principal was threatened. Please investigate. Justice must be done." Carla frowned. She flipped through the documents. Photocopies of the parent letters, the expulsion notice, and even a printed image of Foster kneeling in the rain. "My God," she whispered. "This is real." Within hours, a special inspection team was dispatched to Lincoln Elementary. No announcement, no warning, just sharp suits, badges, and questions. When they arrived, Principal Grant nearly dropped his coffee. "We weren't expecting—" "That's the point," Carla said, cutting him off. "We're here to review the handling of a student's expulsion. A boy named Foster Daniels." The name hung in the air like thunder. Teachers exchanged worried looks. One muttered, "They actually came." Carla and her team began pulling records: admission forms, complaint letters, disciplinary files. Each document revealed more than the last. The parents' pressure. The threats to withdraw donations. The board's silent approval. When Carla confronted the PTA head, Mrs. Turner, the once powerful mother who led the protests, stuttered nervously. "We were only protecting our children. That boy, he was dirty, unfit." "Unfit?" Carla repeated, her eyes sharp. "For what? For education? For compassion?" Mrs. Turner turned pale. "You don't understand the pressure." "No," Carla said firmly. "You don't understand humanity." Meanwhile, news of the surprise inspection spread quickly through town. Reporters began to gather again. Former students whispered about justice. And in her mansion across town, Mrs. Harrison received a phone call. "Ma'am," the caller said, "it looks like the district is reopening the case. Someone filed an anonymous complaint." She smiled knowingly. "Good," she said. "Truth has a way of finding light." At Lincoln Elementary, Principal Grant finally exhaled after hours of questioning. Carla turned to him before leaving. "Mr. Grant, you were forced to sign that expulsion, weren't you?" His eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I didn't want to. I tried to protect him." Carla nodded softly. "Then maybe you can help make this right." Outside, thunder rumbled again, not from the sky this time, but from justice itself. Foster didn't know it yet, but the truth was rising, ready to break the chains that once bound his name in shame. 3 days later, Lincoln Elementary became the center of attention again. Not because of gossip or complaints this time, but because the truth was finally being spoken aloud. The investigation team returned with cameras, reporters, and files stacked high with evidence. Students peeked through classroom windows. Teachers whispered nervously in the halls. The same parents who once marched proudly against Foster now avoided eye contact. Their confidence turned to fear. In the principal's office, Carla and her team sat before the school board. Principal Grant stood to one side, trembling but resolute. For the first time, he wasn't afraid to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carla began, her voice calm but firm, "we've reviewed every document, every message, every signature. What we found is not only unethical, it's heartbreaking." She lifted one of the letters. This was written by a group of parents demanding the expulsion of a student solely for being poor. Words like unclean, unfit, and danger to reputation were used. The school board approved it under financial pressure. A murmur filled the room. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. Mrs. Turner, the mother who had led the charge, sat in the back row, her face pale as snow. Carla turned to her directly. "Mrs. Turner, you spearheaded this complaint, didn't you?" Her lips quivered. We only wanted what was best for our children." "What was best," Carla said sharply, "would have been teaching your children kindness, not cruelty." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Principal Grant stepped forward. His voice broke as he spoke. "I signed that expulsion letter. I was pressured by the board and the PTA. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. I'll carry that guilt forever." Carla nodded solemnly. "You're not the one on trial here, Mr. Grant. Fear is human. But discrimination is a choice, and those responsible will face consequences." By the end of the day, the verdict was clear. The PTA leaders and the school board members who forced the decision were dismissed. The district issued a public apology to Foster and his family, and Principal Grant, though remorseful, was cleared of wrongdoing, his integrity restored. That evening, news stations broadcast the story live. The headline read, "Justice for Foster Daniels, the boy who changed a town." At home, Foster sat on the couch beside Mrs. Harrison, watching the report quietly. Amara leaned against him, eyes wide. "Big brother," she whispered. "They're talking about you again." He smiled gently. "No, Amma, they're talking about Faith." Mrs. Harrison took his hand, her voice soft. "You see, Foster? The truth always finds its way just like light through a crack." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "God didn't forget us, did he?" She smiled. "He never does, my boy. He just waits for the right moment to show everyone. Else he was there all along." And as the camera showed Foster's old school gates, once symbols of rejection, now filled with signs that read, "We stand with Foster," the whole town finally understood. The message he had carried all along: faith, kindness, and courage could rewrite even the darkest destiny. A month after the investigation, the town council announced a special community assembly, one meant to address what had happened at Lincoln Elementary and to honor the boy whose story had awakened the conscience of an entire town. Flyers went out, and by the evening of the event, the community hall was packed. Teachers, parents, reporters, students, and even church leaders filled the seats. At the front sat Mrs. Harrison, Amara on her lap, and Miss Evelyn by her side. Principal Grant stood quietly in the corner, his eyes filled with humility. The mayor stepped to the microphone first. "Tonight we gather not to dwell on shame, but to celebrate courage. One small boy showed us what faith truly means. Foster Daniels, would you please come forward?" The crowd erupted in applause as Foster rose from his seat. He looked smaller than the moment deserved, wearing a simple blue shirt and neatly pressed trousers. But when he walked to the stage, there was something radiant in his calmness. He reached the podium, and for a moment he said nothing. The room fell completely silent. Cameras pointed. Every eye was fixed on the boy who had once been invisible. Foster took a slow breath and began. "When I was still at my old school," he said softly, "people didn't want to sit near me. They said I was poor. Maybe I was. I didn't have much. No backpack, no lunchbox, no clean shoes." He paused, glancing toward Mrs. Harrison, who smiled through tears. "But I had one thing left," he continued. "Something nobody could take away. My faith. Every time people laughed or turned away, I told God, 'Please, don't let me lose my faith.' And he didn't. Even when they sent me away, he stayed with me." Murmurs of emotion rippled through the crowd. A few parents bowed their heads. Foster continued, his voice growing steadier. "I used to think being poor made me less. But now I know poverty doesn't make you weak. Losing hope does. I thank the people who hurt me because they helped me see who I truly am. And I thank the people who love me because they showed me that kindness is stronger than hate." The hall was still. Even the cameras stopped flashing for a moment. Then Foster turned toward the children sitting in the front row. "If anyone ever makes you feel small, remember this. God doesn't make mistakes. You are not what people say about you. You are what you keep believing when everything else is gone." Tears streamed freely across the audience. Miss Evelyn sobbed quietly. Even Mrs. Turner, the mother who once wrote the cruel letter, sat trembling in the back, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." When Foster stepped away from the podium, the crowd rose to its feet in thunderous applause. People wept, hugged, and shouted his name. "Foster! Foster!" Mrs. Harrison met him halfway down the aisle, pulling him into her arms. "I'm so proud of you, my son," she whispered. He smiled through tears. "I just said what I felt, Mom." She touched his face gently. And the world listened. That night, as they drove home under the soft glow of streetlights, Foster looked out the window at the town that had once rejected him. It was different now, humbled, awakened, and in the quiet of his heart, he knew the boy who prayed in the rain had finally become the voice that made the world believe again. Years passed, but Foster never forgot where he came from, or the storm that once soaked him to the bone under that torn plastic tarp. The boy who was once expelled for being poor had grown into a young man who carried faith wherever he went. Now 18, he stood in front of a classroom, not as a student this time, but as a guest speaker. On the chalkboard behind him, written in neat white letters, were the words, "Faith is stronger than fear." Dozens of young faces stared up at him. Some were shy, some restless, but all of them listened. He spoke gently, with the same calm conviction that had once carried him through hunger and humiliation. "When I was your age," he said, "I used to think the world didn't see me. But God did. He saw me when I was hungry. He saw me when I was afraid. And he sent people to remind me that love still exists." The students leaned in as he smiled. "No matter who you are or what you don't have, you are never forgotten. Faith will always find you, even in the rain." When he finished, the room burst into applause. The teacher, wiping a tear, whispered, "Thank you, Foster. You've reminded them, and all of us, what hope really means." Later that evening, Foster walked home to the house that had become his safe haven. Amara, now a bright 10-year-old, ran to meet him at the door. "You're back! Mom's in the garden!" In the backyard, Mrs. Harrison was tending to her flowers. Her hair had turned whiter, her hands slower, but her eyes were as kind as ever. Foster approached and knelt beside her. "You'll get your hands dirty, Mom," he teased softly. She smiled, brushing soil from her gloves. "Maybe. But these flowers remind me that even broken things can bloom again." He looked at her lovingly. "You're my flower, Mom." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them gathered in the living room. Amara hummed softly as Mrs. Harrison read from her old prayer book. When it was Foster's turn to pray, he clasped their hands and whispered, "Thank you, God. You gave me a mother when I had none, a home when I had nowhere to go, and strength when I was weak. I used to ask you not to let me lose my faith, but now, I thank you for teaching me that you never left me in the first place." Tears welled in Mrs. Harrison's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "You kept your promise, my son. You never lost your faith, and you never will." Years later, long after the story of the boy who prayed in the rain became a lesson told in classrooms and churches across the country, Foster visited Mrs. Harrison's grave. He knelt beside it, Amara by his side, and laid a bouquet of white lilies. "You gave me love when the world turned its back," he whispered. "And because of you, I never stopped believing." As they stood to leave, the wind carried the faintest echo of a woman's voice, soft, loving, eternal. "When the world turns its back, God never does." Foster smiled toward the sky, the same way he once did as a boy, and whispered, "Thank you, God, for never leaving me in the rain."